back to the Valley to Peak Nutrition Podcast. It is Kyle and Lindsay here this week, and this is from this is a question that we're covering this week that came in from a listener, and I'm excited to cover it on for a couple of different reasons. One, I think that it's a question that gets thrown a lot around in hunting and outdoor circles and kind of involves like time away from the house and family. And part of the reason I'm excited is because we get to get your take on this. So I'm looking forward to that. And then he had some other questions, particularly as they were about the sheep hunt. And so like, I think the main theme here is a lot of these questions are questions that I think everyone struggles with any hobby that pulls them away from the family and the whole family isn't going. And then some of the questions are circled around, taking on a bigger hunt. So I think places like Alaska or even someone who lives in the Midwest that's interested in hunting out west, it's a fairly big endeavor trying to break away from the house and from work and from different things to make stuff like this happen. So he asked several good questions in his email. And so I think covering those is just going to make for a really cool and a really good episode. But I want to tell a quick story really quick. So it is November 23rd when I'm recording this. We just finished pretty much all of the hunting season. We had a really great season, got some extra meat to fill the freezer up. So I'm getting ready to go to bed last night. We have fresh salmon cooked. We have fresh elk stroganoff cooked. We have meat in the freezer. We have all of these great things. What do I see you pull out at 11 p.m. as a snack out of the freezer?
Pizza bites.
Pizza rolls. I'm like, man, there is so much stuff in here. And you pull out the pizza rolls, which, yes, we have those. I just thought it was so funny because, I'm sure that people think, oh, as a dietitian or a nutritionist, you must just eat healthy all the time. And I mean, for the most part, we do. But when you pulled those out, I just thought it was ironic.
I think a lot of people assume that the entire family eats a certain way. And that's where the misconception is. You do consistently eat extremely healthy, not just healthy foods, but the appropriate amount and all of that. Takes 2 weeks to get through a Reese's peanut butter cup. But the rest of the family is a little more free to do what they're going to do. And so that is why I had the pizza rolls.
That's right. No shame, no judgment at all. I just thought it was funny. All right. So let's jump into this. The email was great. It's lengthy. So I'm going to try to break it up in a way that's digestible and doesn't, put you to sleep just because I'm reading it. The content was great, but I just don't want to read it to you either. So long story short, the gentleman that wrote in is named Preston and listens to the show quite a bit, which we appreciate. Thank you, Preston. And he starts by saying, I'm sure that you're going to get a lot of responses to this. Sheep hunting has always been in the back of my mind as I get closer and closer to 40 years old, but it just seems like this big undertaking that, would seem like something I couldn't do. Some of the questions I've struggled with are, could little old me really do something that seems like that big? Could I get time away from the family? What about the cost? How about improving on things like shooting that I may not be really familiar with? So I want to go through a couple of these different ones, and I would love Lindsay's input, especially on the family front, to chime in and kind of talk about what it's like for her and things that I did or didn't do to set her up for that ahead of time. So first and foremost, addressing the piece of, could little old me really go do something like that? I would say that there's definitely an element of that I had prior to going to, because sheep hunting, mountain goat hunting, anything, that's just full of, quote, risk and adventure and something like that can be intimidating if you've never done it. And the best thing that I can say to that, and the best thing I can say to being away for 14 days as far as leaving work, is I would say just commit to it, and then you'll figure out the steps as you get more and more into it. What I have found for most people is, if they make the commitment, they'll rise to that commitment by the time it comes time to go. If instead you're trying to plan this perfect thing forever ahead of time, you'll probably never go. So I think, making the commitment to go is step one, and then you'll figure out the rest if it's something that's, truly important to you. On the family side of things, here's where I would love your input. So number one, what was the hardest part on you for me being away that long?
This is something that is true of not just this hunt, but I think hunting season in general, because chances are it's not just like one day here and there, but it's a chunk of time or multiple chunks of time. And I truly, to everyone listening and you, fully support hunting. I grew up doing it. I think it's great. I think that if that's what is your thing, like I want to encourage that as much as I can. But I think something that has come up each year, and then especially for this hunt, was the prep, that it's way more than just 2 weeks gone. So it's not like, the time away or the challenges started the day you left and then it was tough, tough 2 weeks and then they were done. But there's so much prep that goes into something like this. There's training and, you needed to go do that. And so the physical side of it, right? Where you physically have to leave the house to go do some of these things, or even time to go try on different gear, or to be on a phone call and asking someone's input, or getting your gun sighted in. It takes time, which you have to prep to go. But, the family's committing to more than just 2 weeks of having, in our case, dad, away a little bit more. Or, even mentally kind of thinking that way. I'd say like, oh, what are you thinking about? Well, I'm trying to figure out if I should do these pants or these pants because the rocks are this color and I don't know about this. So it's fine. It's just, there's a commitment that happens before you left. So that was one of them. Another one, and this just happened to be our timing. This was planned. What month did you decide? In May. And then we decided to move and our house sold, and it turns out that our closing date was not flexible. And so I was going to be moving while you were gone. That ended up working out fine. This was unavoidable, but the timing was really lousy. We were trying to pack our house into a smaller one for now, moving, and school started. And so it was just a lot at once. But again, that was, we could have seen that coming. And the last one that I guess I complained to you about, I don't mention other people much. It's other people's comments. So it depends on which group I'm in, because some people just understand. But there's a lot of comments about a hunting widow and, oh, is Kyle gone again? Or, gosh, that's got to be really expensive. Or, gosh, how much is he hunting this year? Isn't like this like his second big thing? That just gets old. At least for me, it gets old. Even though I encourage it and I like that you get to do it, it just gets annoying that people ask that. So I'd say those are the three biggest things that came to mind.
Yeah, and I know that those exist. And so like one of his questions in here is, how do you balance time with family, knowing that you need to do all of those things? Because I think anybody who signs up for something like this knows that those elements are going to be involved. You're going to have to physically take more time than normal to get ready. You're going to have to prepare, your rifle to get ready. You're going to have to make some preparations outside of that. So I think it's good to hear like what exists as a challenge for you, because that you said it in the beginning, you said it perfect. That exists whether I go to Alaska or I go just here in Idaho, because those things lead up to that. To answer one of Preston's questions, as far as like, how do I balance time for that? Even though it's a challenge, like I would love for you to weigh in and say if this is true. Even though it's a challenge, I try to squeeze those things in as much as possible to where they do not have any effect on the family. And I do that through, I create a schedule. I create a schedule in reverse order. So I know the date that I've got to leave by, and I know what needs to be done leading up to that date, both shooting as well as my training plan. I know what days I need to be peaking, what days I need to be backing off. I know when I leave. And so I will literally write the days, the hours, the times, put it in my calendar as though it's in any other meeting, and I go then. So for example, a goal of mine beginning in May, until I left for the hunt was every other Friday. I would leave the house at 6 a.m. I would be to the place that I wanted to shoot by 7. I would shoot until 8. I needed to leave by 8, no matter how far I was, so I could get back home, eat breakfast with the boys and Lindsay, and then work the rest of the day, and maintain with clients. And the same was true of my training schedule. If I had a training day that had a lot of volume, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, whatever, that could potentially mean that night before was either going to be, I probably was not getting a lot of sleep. But the core thing that always is in front of my head is, as much as humanly possible, this has to affect the family very little. And when I create the schedule, like, that's how I do it. I create something that's very rigid. It's very structured. I follow it to a T. And that ensures, like, if I have that schedule and I have that calendar, that ensures that by the time I leave, everything that needs to be done has been done. I don't know if that helps you guys or not.
Yes. And that the back and forth, it's actually the answer to another question that we have coming up later that I'll wait to, talk more on. But that was super helpful. And that's happened. I feel like that this is the first hunt. I mean, it's the first major hunt you did, but that's the first time that I've seen it that planned, and it was super helpful. A lot of the training, like Kyle said, was before kids. And usually I wake up pretty early, but he wakes up pretty early. Training was before kids woke up, or they were up and had watched a show and were eating breakfast, and he would walk back in the door, which is not, uncommon for workouts. And he would also choose to work out during, or, sight in the rifle or whatever, during times that we had other commitments. So there was less time away from the family, or less time away from times that we were used to doing things together, or him doing something, on his own. There wasn't a lot of time where we were just like sitting here on a Saturday and you were just gone doing something. It was at very practical times that we were already, going.
What did I do, or what could I have done, or what could any person in this position do to set the family and you up better for the duration of a season, or for being gone during like a 2-week block like I was for the sheep hunt?
Like, what could they do ahead of time? This is something that we've had to work on over the years, even before we had kids, I think. I think what is helpful is to discuss both people's expectations for the time and commitment to the hunt before. So, like, what prep is going to go into this? What does this really look like? What time of year is it? Is there other things going on? Are there other things going on? And also after the hunt. So it was like, oh, dad's home. It's like, oh, but now I have to deal with this meet and getting, things picked up at the airport, and all of friends, which is so cool, but all these friends wanting to hear like every single detail of the story and things like that. So I think just discussing what that time looks like. And then over time, we've sorted that out. It probably looks different if, one of the partners is working and one isn't, or if there's kids or not, or what they have going on that time of year, if they're involved in other things. But I think that helped a lot when you've asked things like, well, you've just asked, what would be helpful before I go? Is there something that, you think you can't get done? I mean, this one, because of the timing, it was helpful that a couple of friends had offered, or we begged for them to be available with us moving. So that was kind of set up ahead of time. But yeah, I think discussing the expectations ahead of time, and hopefully whoever is the one staying home, when there's reservations or even frustrations or worries about things getting done, is to not take that, whoever's leaving or doing the adventure, not taking that as, you're not supportive. It's just you're trying to sort it out. That's been helpful. Another one is to set things up so that what you normally did still got done. So if there was weekly things or monthly things that was always your jobs, like the grocery order, you put the grocery order in, you still put the grocery order in. It was really nice not to have to worry about that. Or if there are certain bills or budgeting things that you do, you still did that before you left, or set it up to where I knew what to do. Even, I feel a little bit bad about this, but even getting a ride to and from the airport. I mean, we picked you up, right? Okay, we picked you up, but like super early in the morning, or if you have a bunch of little kids at home, it is nice. And it doesn't mean we miss you less, but it is nice to have some of that done. You were conscious to let me have some time before you left to get things ready that I needed to get ready myself too, or, time to be alone to get things done. And you're probably going to laugh at this one, but it's really helpful. When you put your things away before you leave, even though I know sometimes it's a mad dash to fit it into your pack, it is helpful when boots and boxes and containers and jackets and food are put away. So not naming names, but that's really helpful. And the big one, I shouldn't say the big one, it's just a really helpful one, is that for those of you that don't know, Kyle is the one who cooks at our house. I mean, I can make kid lunch sometimes, but he's the main cook. And so when meals were prepped ahead of time, that was wonderful. And also, he leaves gift cards for us, and not just food gift cards, but like gift cards just to fun things that I want to do. So that was nice. Other than being thoughtful, it's just nice to not have to worry about it on nights that we were running late or overwhelmed or something like that.
Yeah, I think the main theme, and like it's not like I've written a book on this at all. I guess I'm just sharing things that I think of that, maybe they'd be helpful to other people. The main thing in my head is I know how hard it's going to be on Lindsay and the kids when I'm gone. So just trying to not be so focused on the hunt that I don't think about that at all. And so, yeah, sometimes it would be making meals ahead of time, or at least making sure there's some protein thawed out that she could cook, or buying gift cards. So like the gift cards that I bought were a couple of Chick-fil-A gift cards because the boys love going and playing in the playhouse, and they love getting ice cream. So it was there. I got a Dairy Queen one. And then, Lindsay likes this little boutique shop downtown that sells what does that place sell? Paper and cute stationery and scarves and earrings and local stuff. So I got her a gift card to that, which I knew she wouldn't be able to use until I got home, but at least it worked in the moment. So yeah, I think the main thing that I try to think about before something like that, because again, Preston, the question was, how do you balance being gone that long with family and stuff? I try to think, if I was in her shoes, it's going to be hard. What can I do to make it a little less hard? And then go do that in spite of there being so many variables to get, dialed in before you leave, and dialed in being things like rides to the airport and making sure that security can be checked, and making sure that you have all of your ducks in a row before something like that, because you don't want to get up there and you forget something. For me, it's again, setting the schedule, following the schedule. And I treat those things on my schedule, whether they're personal or their work or their anything, I treat them as though they were as important as a meeting with the president of a company. To me, there is nothing else on the planet going on during that time frame than what's on that schedule. So that can sound really rigid, that can sound really structured, but at the same time, it creates an immense amount of freedom for me because I get everything done. I don't ever have to wonder if there's a loop that has not been closed, because I know that if I follow that schedule, then it all happens. One question that he had asked, he said, well, how do you leave work for that long? This was my number one fear before ever committing to this. And when I had the opportunity presented to me just before I committed, I called Mark Hulsing, and he and I are good friends. I trust his thoughts on things. We talk about a lot of things other than hunting, and this was the main element that I was concerned about, because Lindsay's pretty independent. I often joke with her, if something ever happened to me, I don't worry about anything with him. Sometimes I hope they miss me just because she's so independent that she could take care of anything she needed to. But ultimately what he said and what I leaned on was communication. If you communicate almost to over communication with clients and with people that work for you, and with, if you've got all of those things covered ahead of time, then you can leave freely and you don't have to worry about it. And so that was on my schedule too. I created a series of giveaways for our clients that I had scheduled to go out through email, so they felt like they were still getting great value. And I set up routine check-ins when we got back. Their communication was very clear, and yeah, that was just important to me. Sometimes people I think owning your own business is like you can do whatever you want. That is the last thing that it is. Not if you still want a business anyway. So to me, it's very, 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 very important that they felt like they were not just like, oh well, peace out for 2 weeks, see you when I get back. I mean, it was very, very important to me that they felt like they had great communication and were still getting some good value, even though I was, kind of out of service for a few days there. But the long and short of it is, I think if you communicate and you're thoughtful and you commit ahead of time and you create some structure so that everything that needs to get done before you actually go happens, I don't think that there is anything to worry about. And you are very likely, if this is important to you, to get everything done and look back after you get home and feel like that was not nearly as big of a deal as I made it out to be in my head prior to leaving. So the second component of this was I would love to hear the details on how you addressed the shooting while maintaining your work and family obligations, training, etc. So strictly thinking about shooting, and I talked to you about a lot about this, so like I want to ask you your opinion. First and foremost, I reached out to guys that I look up to who are very proficient shooters, and I called them, and rather than like telling you what they said, we did a Zoom. So the next two people you're going to hear from are Dione and a good friend named Pat. And both of these guys shoot a lot. They're proficient shooters. And I wanted to pick their brains on, if this is a goal of mine, how do I improve this? I mean, I know that it would probably be impossible to narrow it down to like one thing you could do to improve on your shooting. But that was the gist of a lot of these questions was, one of the things that stood out most to me was working on that this summer and just how much confidence it gave me in working on it. But a lot of those came from tips like from you.
Yeah.
So I thought it'd be best from the horse's mouth. Like if you could
Yeah.
condense it down to one or two things that anybody in general could do to improve in their shooting, what would you say they are?
I'd condense it to a few things more than that, but I am recently a significantly improved shooter also. I mean, I've been shooting a lot. I've been reloading since I was like 13 or 14 years old. But I've been able to get away with a lot just situationally because of how I hunt. But realistically, I even had significant holes in my shooting game and went and did a shooting school with Form through Rockslide, the Shoot to Hunt one, and that's where a lot of what I ended up telling you came from. And the thing I realized there is, as a person who had considered himself a pretty experienced shooter, is that I was very, very fundamentally flawed in just basic things of how I was on the rifle. And I think that's one of the bigger things that surprised me about not only myself, but almost everybody else I've seen shoot too, is that people aren't doing the simple things right. So learning how to get behind the gun right, support it right, and build a proper position, I think that's instrumental in being able to make some of these shots that you'd otherwise struggle with much, much easier. The other thing outside of that I put a lot of emphasis on, and I was, tried to help you with this year also, was to just make sure everything on your weapon system was right. Make sure you have a real perfect zero, make sure you have good data, and make sure you have a gun that's put together in a way where you're going to be super confident in it and you don't have to worry about losing zero. Because when you're not worried about a lot of the little things that could happen, it makes you more able to focus on the shot. So even just making sure you've got a well put together weapon system with good ammunition that you've proofed out, and you have a perfect zero, and then getting behind the gun right, just those few things is going to fix most people shooting to a level that is much better than where they're at.
I just would be curious, like what would your tips be if someone asked?
I think it's kind of like the conversion of two delusions at the same time. One being that most people think that shooting far is insanely hard and complicated, and they can't do it without a ton of knowledge and like a ton of specific skills. That converging with the fact that people think not practicing, they're somehow going to achieve their best possible outcome in a moment of high stress. So it's like the best possible tip I could ever give somebody is to go shoot a lot. Like literally go mix your hiking training hikes and stuff in with shooting. Go hike into the mountains, shoot cross canyon, shoot uphill, shoot downhill, shoot in locations you've never been to before. Um, we're kind of lucky with how good ballistic computers are and stuff now that a lot of the elevation stuff, if you're putting in good data to start with, is really, really accurate. It's really just coming down to reading wind, which is 100% a practice skill. Um, I think I wish it'd be like, trying to only shoot free throws and thinking you're going to start sinking half court shots. It just doesn't make any sense. Like go practice what you're trying to train for.
Yeah, I mean, that was essentially the advice that you gave me when I first reached out was you kind of said, look, this is going to sound really basic, but maybe one of the best things that you could do is just to go shoot. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of that is sort of what you're describing, but a lot of that too was for me, I had shot so infrequently that whenever I would go shoot, it would take, five or more rounds just to reduce the anxiety about the fact that I'm at a range and the fact that
Hmm.
this is going to be loud and the fact that this thing is going to throw itself into my shoulder and, like to get over that to where I could even be at a point where I was trying to assess, is my shooting improving? Is my gun hitting where I would like for it to be? And, that tip alone I think really helped. And it's true. The
Yeah.
more often you go and you know what to expect, the less that anxiety is there. And then naturally, of course, when you're out in the field and the stress is high, the less that anxiety is there too. And I think it all goes together. And I like how you said, I think the best tip that I could give is really built off of two big myths that a lot of people tell themselves
Yeah.
and overcoming those. So it's great.
Yeah, you mentioned Dione earlier, and he's the one that basically got me into all this, and he's the one I call when I have questions and stuff. And he just took me out to a place he shoots, and I think his exact words were, "Stop talking and just do what I tell you to." And it was not anything complicated or long. We went and zeroed at 100 yards on a cardboard box and walked up, and he's like, "That's close enough." And then we went out and set a target at 800 yards, and I laid down and shot 10 shots, and we went out and checked it, and they were all in like a pretty fairly consistent band, like enough that we could use it. We made a small adjustment. I changed my velocity in my ballistic calculator until that what I saw matched up to exactly to what it would be in the calculator. And he's like, "Okay, you're done. You can go shoot anywhere between 100 and 1,200 yards now until you start hitting transonic, and
Yeah.
you're like just good. Good luck."
Yeah. And
So
I think that is something that I had learned too, which is like you were talking earlier about it not being an overly complicated system, and I agree. One of the big takeaways I had from going out and practicing so much was my rifle is a system, right? And as long as I do what I need to do to control the variables within the system, it will do exactly what it needs to do. And those
absolutely.
variables, like you had kind of taught me and I had learned was number one, like building a chain from the rifle connecting to the shoulder, going straight back through your back, going through your rear end, down to your bottom legs. And the more that is I keep using the word chain, but that's probably not the right word. What am I trying to say?
Like a bridge.
Yeah, like a bridge to where there's a consistent point in there to where, it works as an entire system.
Hmm.
And so for me, I knew if all of those variables are controlled, my scope's not going all over the place, I have a calm breath, I'm squeezing the trigger rather than jerking it, it will go where I want it to go, right? And I think that understanding that that would happen really helped encourage me to go shoot and to be able to recognize when those variables are there or if there's something that's not there. So, like for example, on a mule deer hunt this year, there was a buck that was at 400 yards, and I initially got in position, and I had an okay rear rest, but not great. I was prone on a
Hmm.
bipod, scope moving all over the place, and I knew that that variable for the rear rest needed to be controlled. I wouldn't have known that without the practice and practicing the things that you guys had mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, it's your experience, proving out in the field, right? Like, what feels good enough to break a good shot and what doesn't, right? Like you know what's too much wobble in your scope. You know what's not a stable position. Like, what it feels like to have everything, like you said, your rifle system kind of operate in a way where it'll meet your expectation, right? Like if I squeeze the trigger right now, I know what's going to happen. I'm not wondering.
Yeah.
That comes from practice. And like you talked about the stress that you used to feel just from being at a range, like that's obviously only heightened when you're in a hunting scenario and you actually have an animal in front of you. So just the more practice and the more reps you get, that's why I'm trying to get people out to competitions and stuff. Like Rob, who runs SNS Archery for us, I dragged him out to an inter hunter match, and um, he had a blast, learned a ton, and it's just like it's nerve wracking to do something new, right? And yeah,
And as a part of that, I think like what you had mentioned earlier about going out at distance and in a real scenario, there's a massive, and everyone knows this, but there's a massive difference between shooting off of a bench and shooting
yeah,
600 yards off of sticks. But I think
hmm
an element of that is if you're at a bench, you're probably shooting 100 yards. If you're in the field, you're probably not going to be at a perfect 100. And so if you have a system where your scope requires any sort of a dialing, even remembering my zero's at 100 and I need to dial. And so if you go out in the field and you're constantly finding different distances that require you to reach up and check the dial, reach up and check the dial, recheck. And so when you get in the field, it's automatic. You know, when it's like your brain remembers you've got to do something to this mechanism called a scope on top before you ever get in a position where you're actually going to be able to shoot, make the adjustment and go. Whereas if you get in a state that's high stress and you're only shooting off of a bench and something's at 300 yards, your zero set to 100, you forget to adjust because you're not in that mode of having to do so. You hit low and you miss, right? So,
yeah.
yeah, I think again, like here I am going down rabbit holes and I told you to keep it to one.
No, that's all right.
And I think the one is right. It's like, just go practice. If you go
It's what
practice, the nuance takes care of itself.
it's exactly right. It's what settles out all this stuff you're talking about. It's what gets you acclimated to doing all of these things that, like, if you don't do it very much and you have to remember how to do all this stuff in a moment of stress, like you're bound to forget something, right? You're going to hold wind the wrong direction, right? Like how many times have you seen people do that? They're like, all right, you got to hold, whatever it is, a half MOA, 3/10, whatever. Like you're going to hold a wind call and people hold the wrong direction. It's because you're just not practicing. So now
Yeah.
instead of, accounting for that wind, you're actually moving the bullet further away from where you want it to. You don't want to do that on an animal. You want to go do that on rocks or something until it's like ingrained in your head where you won't do it again.
Yeah. Okay. So, what I would be curious about from you is like, since I talked to you so much about this, what did you notice?
I think what's tricky is there was so much unknown to it. I mean, you sight in your rifle and it's great and you're dialing everything in and getting the right, load on everything and all of that. But then there's the whole factor of I'm going to travel now and lose my rifle mid-flight. And can I say that? And, or is it, I'm going to lose my rifle for a bit on the way there. And is it going to be sighted in the same? And, I mean, it is an art to, is the weather going to affect this? And what's it going to be like when we're hiking the whole time? And what if the weather is bad? And so I think just getting advice and just wisdom from people that do have more experience, that are more knowledgeable in it, to say like, oh, weather won't affect this, or just keep this in mind when you're, shooting into the wind or whatever. I don't know what advice they gave you, but I think just being reassured by that. I mean, you asked them a lot of questions, and part of that is you're very analytical and you really want to learn how to do this. So like the reloading stuff and learning, I don't know. I can't remember all the things that you learned, but there was many little nuanced things that they really helped teach you, I guess, or remind you of, that seemed to bring more peace of mind that the gun would work, that you would shoot well. Like they were just, I guess, realistic. But besides that, I guess thinking besides just, the habits or prep or whatever that went into other components to get ready to go, especially on this hunt, not just regular hunts, but like on this one, it was such a big deal. And it was kind of one of those times that you can't come back empty-handed, it felt like. I mean, I would have been okay if you came back empty-handed, but you don't go up there and do this whole thing and then miss, right? Like ideally. So I guess other traits that came in handy is you have great time management. You planned way ahead. I mean, you noticed, or you mentioned just now, this calendar that you came up with, and I think sticking to that, even though some people say, "Oh, that's really regimented." Well, yes, but it, like you said, it did free you up and it took the stress off about when you were going to get things done. You, over time, this is something I think we have probably photo evidence of the first few times you went hunting, the meal prep and how many days it would take, and Ziplocs across our living room of days and labeled and all of that. But it's become easier and more fluid with more time and experience. And that's not just meals, it was meal prep and a plan for training. Like there was a season that your training didn't feel great, and you've kind of fine tuned that for the type of, climbing or type of hunting you'll be doing. Even packing, you're a lot quicker at knowing, like, well, this gear works for multiple types of weather, or that will leave me too warm, or that's going to keep me too cold. And also choosing gear. I mean, I realize how little you want to take so you can really, get back where you're going to go. But also it has to be really like quality of practical stuff. So just, I'd say all the prep has just become way more fluid. And you, like I said earlier, you like this because you're kind of a geek for it, but also you became really knowledgeable. You knew for the most part where you were headed ish. And so you kind of learned the location, learned the environment a little bit more ahead of time, and knew how to train for that by not just your own experience, but by asking other people. You were always checking the weather. I mean, every other day it was like, oh, it might rain this day. Oh, should I take this gear? You were always up on it. You became as knowledgeable as you could about it. And then there came the point that I think this is good for you. This is good for anybody. You have to just say, I know as much as I'm going to know, and I prepped as much as I'm going to prep, and I need to just risk it. And if my toes get cold, my toes get cold. And if I, my gut needs sighted in, it needs sighted in. So there's a lot of unknown with travel and scouting and all of that. But I think at some point, no matter who you are, you have to just think, I'm in it, I'm going, and go for it. And the biggest one was, I'd say someone else going into this, was to consider yourself worthy of getting to go on such a special trip. If you're new to hunting, or if you don't have a ton of experience, or have not always been successful, or aren't one of like the famous guys on a magazine cover, it's still worth it to go. You still deserve to go. You still worked hard to get it done, and you were successful. So nice job.
Speaking specifically to Preston's question about shooting, and anyone else who's like asking that, this is going to seem like such a kind of a cop-out answer, but just doing it, like the more repetitions that I had, the more comfortable I became, and that just kind of alleviated all nervousness whenever it finally mattered. So
I could be thinking of a different time, but wasn't there some time limit or number of shots limit that you set for yourself so you didn't exhaust yourself? So you knew, like, I'm going to do what I can in this amount of time, or this many, I can't remember what the rule was, but that seemed to help a lot and take the anxiety out of needing it to be just right.
Yeah, I sort of set two things. I set a time limit, like I need to be gone by 8 to get back to home by a certain time. And so whatever got done was getting done. Whereas when I first started shooting, I would make myself so nervous, and I'd sit out there, forever, for 8, just all day long trying to get this bullet to go where I wanted it to go. I did the same thing with archery though, where, I would go out and I sort of bit the bait on the mantra that was popular on social media at the time, which was like, put 50 arrows down range every night, put 75 arrows down range every night. Well, my form would fall apart and the shots would go everywhere and it would get in my head. And so I eventually just started committing to shooting 3 to 5 shots a night. And it improved not only the shooting so much, but it improved my head so much. And so, like, I think practice is good to a point, but there comes a point where it starts to get too much in your head because you're too consumed with it. And, like both Pat and Dione talked about, a lot of it just has to do with, there's a couple basic fundamentals, but, one of the most, I think, helpful things I learned was, if I can control a couple of variables that get me as stable as possible, the gun will shoot. It's like any other. It's like any other tool. It will do exactly what you want it to do if you control the variables that are the most important. And understanding that versus like just kind of sending a hope and a prayer down range really helped a ton. Helped a ton too. So yeah, I think those things were big. Another question was, I'd love to hear details on your training. I imagine the physical training is a big mental barrier for folks also, but you noted in the podcast by maintaining a high level of physical preparedness year round, you set you up for success in this area. It's a good life advice on that one for sure. So we will probably I still would like to do a pretty detailed podcast or an article or something really explaining exactly what it was that, I did to prepare for this. I think there's two pretty key elements though that are good really for anyone to hear and to take away from that. Number one was, yes, I tried to do something, 5 to 6 days a week year round. So when Mark had said this opportunity is available in May, there wasn't this year-long prep that I had to go do before I was even in remotely good enough condition to go on the sheep hunt. When he had invited me, we had just finished the Grand Canyon rim to rim to rim death hike like 3 weeks prior. So, I was already still kind of in that mode, and it was just changing things a little bit. Now, with that said, I will say this, and this is the greatest lesson that I learned, and I learned this predominantly from getting ready for the Grand Canyon rim to rim to rim to rim. There reaches a point in your training where more doesn't necessarily become better. You just have to go do it. Right? You will never feel, at no point did I ever invest, I think that day was like 19 hours of hiking or 18 hours of hiking, 60 miles. No day in my training did I ever even get remotely close to that. I did progressively build up some time. I did progressively build up some hikes. I did do some of that. But the one of the targets of training is not like perfect preparation for a specific event. It's trying to get you as close as possible to a higher level of fitness than you were when you started that training block. Right. And so I think that that's a key element of this because, training for something like a sheep hunt or a goat hunt in Alaska can seem like it needs to be this arduous year-long, 2-year-long. I know a guy that's going on a hunt in 2 or 3 years and he was asking about a training plan. I was like, man, don't even think about that until you're at a bare minimum 6 months out, because if you try to run a 2-year training plan, you're just going to exhaust yourself and you're going to hate it by the time you even get close to it actually being effective. So it doesn't need to be that far out. If you are in a position though where you feel like where I was, where you need to, maybe you need to lose weight to get some weight off of your joints to go do something like that, it'd be worth starting something like that right now. But you certainly don't need 2-3 years of training and a strong base leading in for something like this to be able to go do it. And again, we'll have some detailed stuff on this, but I will say this, the training that I did for this, although a little more specific than what I normally do, will not blow anybody's mind. It was basic. I wasn't investing, huge volumes of hours, but I have learned over the years how to write an effective training program. And I think having an effective training program is way more helpful than having some monstrous program with a lot of volume in it and whatnot. I think a good final question to kind of end with, you go on this hunt, you go for a whole hunting season or whatever, what's the most helpful thing that I can do once I'm finally home?
I think the first thing would be putting the boots and boxes and containers and jackets and food away that you left. No, I'm just kidding. But I wouldn't hate it. I'm just being sarcastic. No. Something that is helpful, and this feels very like wifey, like very much not hunting related, but I think what's been helpful is when the family is given some undivided time, like the hunt aside, and like you were over the moon. I mean, so were we. I mean, it was very exciting. The boys didn't really understand it, but when you do come home is giving, especially kids, but I appreciated it too, some undivided time, even though we are excited about the hunt and excited to hear things and see things and pictures and whatnot. It's nice to, like I said, especially for kids, just to have this undivided attention. And you had so many great supportive friends that were just like over the moon to hear the story and asking me if I'd heard anything. And so I kept my mouth shut pretty well. But you really tried to give them, our boys, especially just some time that was just all about them to kind of reconnect. You very quickly, I think I don't know, I think you're indebted for a year or something, but you gave me a break. You encouraged me to leave the house and to go have some time just to do what I wanted to do. But something that's come up, and this I guess is for before the hunt too, is a lot of people, well, I should say a few people, or say, well, if he's doing that, like, well, what do you get? Or, well, what are you going to do? And when's your special trip and things like that? And we don't play it that way at all. But it is also nice that if you've been the one at home or committed to getting everything done, that you just get a bit of a break. So I did use that gift card recently in that boutique shop. Yeah, I'd say that's the thing. Just reconnecting with the family and then sharing it. I think letting them be excited and see pictures and ask a lot of questions. And if you have the ability to call or what is it, InReach or something like that was nice that we knew a loose plan of when you would be home. So kind of had something to look forward to.
All right, last and final, and this, obviously, you're a major part of this too, so I would feel very free to chime in. I'd love to hear your thoughts. The cost of a sheep hunt is very high, even if you get a cancellation hunt, although that does make it very much more affordable. But even if you are hunting out of state, things like that can be expensive. So from a practical standpoint, I think there's a couple things that are worth looking at here. First, I had some advice given to me a handful of years ago after this person, who's a great friend of mine, still is, noticed I'm basically trying to buy my way to improvement. I was buying all this gear, ranging from jackets to pants to rifle to all of this different stuff. And he finally told me, he was like, stop spending your money on gear and start spending that money instead on experience, whether that's extra tags to where you get more opportunity and experience in the actual field, or on practice. Ammo is not cheap. And so if I wanted to learn to be a better shooter, a bigger, better scope was not going to do it. Me taking what I had and going to learn how to use it would. So I took that advice and stopped buying all of this random crap and started putting that into an account for experiences like this, right? And so I think from like a practical standpoint, that was one major change that I made, to where like I'm not buying anything throughout the course of the year that's not either experience or practice. So that helps a ton, because that fund was already there to some degree. Our weekly, monthly, yearly budget, our life is geared towards the idea and knowing there's going to be experiences and things that we want to do and take part of that come up. So rather than buying more stuff or specific stuff, let's just take that money, put it in a separate account, so that if a situation arises that we want to take advantage of, it's there. And so that was exactly what happened in this scenario, where Mark said, hey, I've got this opportunity. Here's the situation. Here's the scenario. Are you interested? I mean, don't get me wrong. There still was a long pause, and you were actually the one who ended up being like, you need to do this. But the financial element of it, although we had to talk about it, it wasn't like an absolute no way, because it was already there. Well, thanks, Preston, for the question. Hopefully this gives you guys a just kind of a look, a different angle at things on how this is possible. We'll do more episodes on I'd like to do some episodes on the gear component of it, the training component of it, and then obviously the nutrition component. So those will be coming out more and more throughout the winter and into the first of the year. And we appreciate you guys always having such great questions. You can send those over to us at info@v2pnutrition.com, and we would be happy to answer them anytime. We will be back again in a couple of weeks with another episode. Have a great week, everyone.